Okay, now we need to look at urban drainage. So this is really important because sudden or heavy or increased rainfall falling onto an urban environment can cause surface water flooding. This is like large puddles and block drains filling roads with water and stuff like this, or it can contribute to downstream flooding. Now, the reason for this is because when you have an urban environment, you have lots of surfaces that are impermeable to rain. So you have surfaces like tarmac and concrete and the roofs of houses. And this means water, when it falls as rain, can pool and collect in these locations because it cannot soak into the ground. It's unable to sink into the ground. Okay, so because it cannot permeate through the ground, it falls on these impermeable surfaces. Things like tarmac or concrete. We need to provide it with some way of avoiding this surface water flooding, or alternatively, if we drain it effectively into local rivers, we will find that our rivers rise and could flood downstream. So it makes it more risky for downstream communities of these large impermeable surfaces. So what we can do is we can have legislation and building regulations that mean that developments have to have permeable urban surfaces. So we can encourage the use of grass and soil, which is permeable, which means the water can sort of soak into it, or we can use things like gravel. And this helps slow runoff. That reduces the chance of extreme river flow. Where we would have flooding potentially downstream. So this might mean having a gravel driveway in place of tarmac or asphalt. The other thing we can do is river flow management. So this is where we try and keep as much water in the upper tributaries as possible. So if we have a catchment, you have small tributaries that feed into a larger river. Okay, if we can somehow keep water up in the upper reaches, up here, rather than allowing it to escape downstream quickly, this means that we reduce flooding downstream. So to do this, we can increase woodlands and wood blocks and afforestation and stuff like that in our upper reaches. So we can have afforestation. which means planting trees. We can have soil banks that help retain water, slow it down, stop it running off the hillside so much, and allows it to soak in slowly rather than flowing downstream quickly. We can also build larger dams to control river flow over a longer period of time by creating a lake behind it. So we can have large river flow control dams. And this will keep the rivers flowing in dry weather by storing it from the winter. And the River Exe actually has one of these as well. We can also do things like maintain floodplains either side of the river, so that if the river does breach its banks, then it won't flood anything valuable. Next one then is raised buildings. So raised buildings is where we can build our houses instead at ground level, where they are vulnerable to flooding. What we can do is raise them up somehow. So this might mean actually physically building them on stilts, which is a strategy adopted by a number of communities around the world that live in areas with big variations in water levels seasonally, or living in sort of more wetland environments where we could transfer that to other places. The other thing you could do is perhaps have low value parts of the house at low level, so things like the garage and entrance at low levels, and then you have your higher value stuff up above that, so your living space. And that's quite a bit more broadly adopted in UK, US, Europe sort of places. There are other things you can do that harden a building without raising it. It's like where you put your electrical sockets. So you can have them mounted higher up the wall so they don't get flooded. You can have concrete in place of plaster on your walls, because you can spray concrete out and it's not damaged by water ingress as much as plaster is. So that helps deal with the cleanup after a flooding event, and that's more like building in resilience into a building. And the last one then is floating houses. So places where they have quite extreme or very low-lying terrain, high population. You will find, so places like the Netherlands, Bangladesh and India. People will take for floating platforms. This means if it is low water, the platform will rest on the bed, and you can, like, it doesn't make any difference. If the water levels increase, then the platform will just float up with a house on top of it. and it will not be flooded, and it can cope quite effectively with that. You just have to make sure your tethers can move up and down, and they are high enough that it can cope with this change effectively. And that's quite an old, ancient way of dealing with this problem.